Sony needs to shake things up. And I'm not even necessarily just talking about the short term. I think they have that worked out for the next year or so because GTA 6 is right there, and we know it's going to have a massive holiday season. But eventually, you have to follow things up with the next generation. And I know many people don't care necessarily about next gen right now, but I will tell you this: the gaming industry does care and it does move on. And based on some of the reports that are going around right now, with the most recent one from Ampere Analysis, it's not painting a great picture. In fact, it looks quite dire, with the potential of a $1,000 system on the horizon. And it would heavily affect the industry to where it could shrink enough. And yeah, that means we could end up in like a cloud gaming future. And I know people don't want that, myself included. But interestingly enough, some scenarios have been drawn up here by the same report. And wouldn't you know it, one of them is something that I was kind of kicking around pretty recently. And yeah, I think it is time for Sony to throw the curveball. And in fact, they might actually do it. And we're going to go over that here today. So if you guys enjoy the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you're new. So this is over on VGC, and they are citing Ampere Analysis. Ampere Analysis did have their report here. It is it's behind like a paywall subscription that I don't have, but VGC was kind enough to at least summarize some of the points that were being made here. But this is the $1,000 next gen problem: why Sony and Microsoft need a new console strategy. I'm specifically focusing in on Sony because they are the one that is most likely to do an iterative, kind of by the books console release with the PlayStation 6. Microsoft is already, they're shaking things up right now in real time. Like, we are seeing this 100-day reset. And I think their strategy is going to incorporate Windows across the board. And we're even seeing them do things like add original Xbox games to be compatible on their Xbox app on PC, and even adding achievements into it. But I think for the most part, they are going to merge Windows gaming, Xbox, and just kind of be this helix thing. So that their shakeup's already underway. We'll see if it works out and if they have a plan for the more budget-minded consumer or audience, and what they can do with that. But Sony, it seems like, is just on a collision course right now with a very expensive offering to start next generation. And that's kind of Ampere Analysis' whole thing right here. They say conventionally designed, incrementally improved next generation consoles in 2028 at a price of $1,000, right? That's what's kind of been at least pitched right now by many analysts. Is that's kind of where Sony's heading. And it's hard not to agree when the PS5 Pro is now at $900, and I think it will get another price increase in 2027, upwards of $1,000 without the disc drive. If you want to be able to play Blu-rays, it's going to be basically $1,100 for the system. Now, this specific scenario that's being painted of $1,000 system, they say in 2028. And that's, by the way, that's kind of where I am now. I was sort of on board with the idea of them just launching it in 2027, but recent, and again, this every month things change with memory and DRAM. It seems like 2027 is going to be like really, really rough to launch new hardware with. So it feels like you have to at least kind of try to wait this out a little bit. So I'm thinking holiday 2028 for the PlayStation 6, and maybe the next, although I don't know, maybe the Xbox Helix might say, whatever, 2027, that's just how it's going to go. But for Sony, I think they're going holiday 2028. This paints a scenario of a $1,000 system, and it says that the combined number of PS6 and Xbox Helix consoles sold after the first 5 years could be up to 38% lower than combined sales of PS5 and Xbox Series over the same period. So that would mean if we take the first 5 years, about 120 million systems between the two, and it's like 3-to-1 for PS5. But if you knock 38%, we'll say, off of that, it's like 70, is that like 76 or 77 million, something like that, systems. Go back to 3-to-1. I mean, guys, that's like lifetime Xbox One numbers almost for sales for Sony with their system. That's unheard of for them. They typically aim for 100 million systems sold, and they've gotten there. I mean, if you go back through PS1 to PS4, 3 of those 4 times, and it seems like they're about to be there with the PS5, so go 4 or 5 times. And the PS3 got off to a disastrous start, and they still crawled their way to 87 million systems sold. So this would be, devastating then for Sony. They would still be very much reliant on the PS5 5 years into the PS6 generation, and it would still be very difficult to get people moving off of that hardware unless they were able to significantly slash the price of the PS6, because pricing is everything for consoles, since that has always been one of the big advantages for any of these platforms. It's just, it makes sense to buy. Sure, you are entering a closed ecosystem, but you're doing so with the understanding that the price tag up front is much more manageable than even like, yes, building a PC or anything like that. And PC prices, I should say, have continued to climb as well. But you have used market. You can try to figure out your way to get a system that is $1,000, we'll say, with no online fee to necessarily play games, and is at least somewhat competitive in terms of the capabilities. That said, a 38% drawdown would be that'd be tough on the industry, because even at a $700 price point for the systems, Ampere Analysis is still projecting a 12% drawdown in terms of console games and service markets. So even at $700 releasing for that price, we'll say 12% lower. Either way, we're seeing a contraction of the gaming market. And I mean, if it really did have a drop of 38%, we'll say, because there's just that many less systems, these companies need to keep finding people to sell to, because the budgets for these games keep going up. Even if they stay right where they are, but they lost, 30%, we'll say, of their install size for the next generation, they still have to find more people to make that make sense. So what do you do? Well, unfortunately, that's where all these cloud gaming talks are coming from. I think Asha Sharma said 1 billion gamers and thought, man, we're going to sell 1 billion Xbox Helix. No, she said that with the mindset of, okay, console, but then mobile and cloud and all these other things. Do you know what I mean? So yes, console becomes a much, much smaller piece of the pie. But here's the thing. Ampere Analysis, while they drew up this doom scenario for next generation, they did have some solutions, we'll say. What can Sony and Microsoft do? Well, one thing, they can delay the console or the launch of the next generation beyond the end of 2028. And they extend the life cycle of current consoles and continue to try to pull more money out of the large and somewhat growing install size. Like, they would then definitely be, I think, catching the PS4, probably surpassing it. But really the whole point is, let's wait this out and see if component prices continue to fall, or at least fall from where they'd be in 2027 or even 2028. And I do think eventually RAM prices will fall, either because the AI bubble bursts or because other manufacturers find their way onto the market and just produce enough RAM, DRAM to try to level out supply and demand. All right. And that's still a gamble, because as time goes on with this chip that you've R&D'd this whole time and figured out, it just gets older. It gets less capable versus the market. And then that could become problematic if you're trying to pitch it as cutting edge, because it just wouldn't be then. So there is obviously a time frame to launch this entire chip that you've made and R&D with AMD, versus when it makes more sense actually to then R&D the next chip and release that and focus on that. The other thing they can do is aim for 2028 window, but reduce prices by making use of heavier hardware subsidies, the new monetization models, more aggressive digital content strategies, and optimized sales channels. So where have we seen aggressive digital content strategies? I mean, guys, it makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it? Why Sony had that hard cutoff for January 28, because they know the margin is kind of necessary for next generation at this point, just try to keep their head above water. And that's probably one of the reasons that they are not saying anything else about this. And they were pretty cold and upfront, even with investors, about this entire thing, while still kind of at least acknowledging the idea that there is an emotional attachment for some of their gamers to physical media. They're stuck. Like, they kind of have to, because they need that extra 10 to 20% margin on these different games. All right. Now, they can also, of course, raise the subscription fees for PlayStation Plus. I think they'll also, there was this thing going around. Hey, they're going to lower prices of games because it's all digital. No, I think next generation we'll see the $80 game be just more normalized, because they need that extra the extra margin. They need more money from each game to then try to have a system that comes out at $900, $800. Even that is still expensive. So you could subsidize it down to that price, but I don't know how it'll make a difference. Will it make a substantial difference to where, oh no, we're good, we will be able to match the PS5 in terms of sales? No, I don't believe so. You'll have an enthusiast crowd show up initially. It's really what happens year 2 and year 3, right? And that's still going to be difficult at an $800, $900 price tag. Even a $700 price tag, it's not easy. Here's the interesting part, all right? They could pivot in a different direction and substantially innovate on hardware form factor and use cases, placing less emphasis on graphical improvement. In fact, they even cite the Wii. The Wii is a funny one. What about the idea of a more lateral move? We're at a point of diminishing returns. This has been discussed at length, right? Not a surprise to anyone right now, to where you get the next system and they're going to be like, hey, it's more 4K. It looks a bit better. We're still using all kinds of tricks and stuff behind the scenes to upscale the image and reconstruct it to 4K, but it's a better algorithm. You know, there's much more in terms of like deep learning and super slam, whatever else. They're going to use all the words, right? Frame generation for better frame rate. It's like, okay, that's good. I think they could still do a lot of that stuff, but go with the idea of, yeah, a form factor that's more convenient, that's more interesting. And yes, I'm kind of saying they look at something like the Switch 2 and how the hybrid model on its own is intriguing to people. It is. It matches lifestyles much better than a system that is completely tethered to the TV. That said, I think Sony can do something interesting where they have 2 different offerings, and I kind of think this handheld is actually a hybrid system. It has video out capabilities, and I kind of think the way that Sony does this, because it's not a massive pivot, it's more of a branding thing. I think the handheld is the PS6, and the PS6, the regular PS6, is a PS6 Pro, and I think they launch it all at once. And that's it. Yes, they have like a dock or something that would come with the handheld, but I almost think because that would just be only digital, they release it with the dock, with maybe, I don't know, a controller of some kind. I don't know if they do their own version of the Joy-Cons, but they have it released to where it can be a docked system or a handheld. And they probably can aggressively price it because it has to go to their PlayStation store. There is no Blu-ray drive on that thing. They wouldn't approach it with some kind of cartridge. And maybe that thing could launch at like an $800 price. And that actually wouldn't be the worst, because I kind of think by 2020, by next year, the Switch 2 could actually be $600. Like, that's where we're heading, by the way, with a lot of the RAM prices behind the scenes right now. It's going to get kind of rough. So with that in mind, I think Sony would have a compelling offering that would make people not immediately write it off. I think some would go, huh, well, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I will look into that. That could be kind of neat. It's not going to be the massive visual leap, but it would be a cheaper system than the $1,000, maybe $1,200 PS6 Pro. And it would be something that would be intriguing just by its form factor alone. I mean, think about this for a minute. Remember when we went into the PS5 with its big reveal for it, and it was zooming out, and we were like, okay, here comes like the $500 price point or something. All of a sudden, another PS5 appeared next to it, and it was a digital system, and it was $400. If you go back and watch reactions for that, no one was expecting it. Everyone was like, whoa, there's 2 PS5s. That's interesting. Sony had a bit of a curveball there because they wanted the price at $400. I don't think they're going to price at $400 this time, but it actually wouldn't surprise me if we zoomed out and there was a handheld or a docked handheld next to the PS6, or at least system we think is the PS6, and the PS6 is actually this hybrid device that is better than the PS5, because yes, I think with where technology is, Sony can hone in on it just being a gaming first device, have a more capable CPU, and have a GPU that can at least put out the same or maybe slightly better than the PS5 and provide a similar experience, but also kind of on the go. So that, I think, is the curveball that Sony really needs to think about here, because otherwise, the future that Ampere Analysis is projecting, that plays directly into the hands of cloud gaming, as we see it's coming out more and more. And I think it's because some of these publishers are realizing where we're heading, and they're thinking, oh, you know what, that just might be how we have to make this work in order to reach enough people so that these games can make some money. And that's when I will admit a lot of people are going to look around and go, huh, maybe it's backlog from here on out. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below in the comments. If Sony did have that curveball in their back pocket where actually the PS6 has a hybrid model as well alongside of a more capable box, which one would you be more interested in at least looking into? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.